When the storm came, it didn't knock it devoured. The world turned white like the sky had swallowed the earth. You couldn't tell where the wind ended or where the snow began. It moved like a living thing, slow, patient, hungry. No hunting, no tracks, no sound, only waiting. Days passed, sometimes weeks. And still, the cold kept breathing deep and endless. So how did they eat when even fire trembled? For the native people, survival didn't begin with fire. It began with foresight. They gathered dried, smoked, buried, turning food into memory. Every seed, every strip of meat, every berry wasn't just food. It was time saved and waiting. A quiet promise whispered before the storm. Out on the Great Plains, there were no salt mines, no ovens, no steady firewood, only the sun and patience. The wind never stopped moving. It carved the land, dried the bones, and whispered through the hides that hung to cure. The Lakota and the Cheyenne watched and learned from it. They knew the sun could do what fire could not. It could stay. They built rawhide racks in the open wind. Thin strips of buffalo meat were laid across the frames, glistening in the light. No smoke, no salt, no rush. Just air and time, the oldest kitchen in the world. They turned the wind itself into an ingredient. Each day the color darkened. The smell changed sharp, at first then quiet and clean. Flies could not follow. Moisture vanished. What remained was not just meat, it was survival in its lightest form. A single bundle could feed a hunter for weeks. No pot, no fire, just strength you could carry. They learned that taking the water out meant taking death out. No rot, no mold, only the deep taste of smoke and sun trapped in every bite. Each strip was light enough to tie to a belt, tough enough to last through a winter that broke stones. Centuries later, archaeologists found their proof pits near Fort Randall, lined with bones and flakes of dried meat. Still dark, still waiting. Each fragment carried the memory of hands that worked against time and won. They didn't just dry food, they dried fear. They dried the days of hunger before they came. They dried time itself and made it edible. In deep cold, the air barely moves. It hangs heavy, slow, silent, waiting, perfect for smoke. The Ojibwe and the Iroquois knew that stillness. They built small fires, no flames, only breath. Meat and fish hung above them, quiet as shadows. Days passed. The fires whispered. The smoke climbed and curled. It wrapped the food in its own kind of skin. The smell filled the air, sharp, bitter, alive. Every curl of smoke carried something unseen, resin from the wood oil from the fire. Tiny ghosts that sealed the flesh against rot. They didn't rush. They waited. Smoke was patient, and patience was warmth. When it was done, the meat turned dark and dry. It didn't spoil even when storms lasted for weeks. The people called it food, but it was more than that. It was shelter built not of wood, but of air. A wall you couldn't see, but could taste. Inside the longhouses, black beams carried proof. Archaeologists still find them poles burned halfway through roofs, stained with soot above the old pits. The marks are maps drawn in smoke and time, showing where the people once built their invisible defenses, because the cold couldn't reach what the smoke had touched. Even hunger turned away from it. The scent alone told the body you are safe. They built walls without bricks, barriers without hands, not to trap the heat, but to keep hunger out. And in that faint blue haze, they found a way to live through silence. Winter was the season that tested faith. If the forest gave nothing, hunger came fast. The rivers froze. The game vanished. Only the trees remained, and what they hid. The Cherokee knew the rhythm of the oaks. The Pomo listened to the whisper of pines. Each autumn, they gathered what others ignored, acorns and pine nuts, small, bitter, but endless. They cracked them open, soaked them in water, washing away the poison called tannin, then dried the pulp under the weak sun until it turned soft and pale. When ground, it became flour-heavy, rich, eternal. One handful held more life than a day's hunt. It fed children when arrows failed. It carried a family through storms when the land gave nothing. The nuts didn't spoil. They waited because patience was part of their nature, and theirs too. Under the soil, they built caches, quiet, careful, holes lined with bark and shell. No smoke, no fire, no smell for wolves to find. Food buried in silence, saved for hunger that hadn't yet come. Archaeologists still find them pits filled with crushed acorn shells across the Carolinas, the Sierra foothills, the old oak lands. Each one a fingerprint of wisdom pressed into the earth. The forest had given, but it was the people who learned how to listen. They didn't wait for mercy, they made memory. And in those quiet jars beneath the frost, they stored not just food, but time itself. Food wasn't hunted, it was remembered. Because survival wasn't only about strength, it was about what you chose to keep long before the snow began to fall. Up north, winter didn't visit, it ruled. The rivers froze so hard you could walk for miles on silence. No traps, no nets, no movement, only the cold patient and alive. The Cree and the Inuit had seen this before. They knew the river's skin could be broken, used, and rebuilt. With bone tools and stone blades, they cut the ice like glass. They dug small vaults between the layers of snow and air and laid fish inside, fresh, still shining from the catch. Then came another layer of snow, another sheet of ice, another secret kept from the wolves. The storm would cover it all, turning the land itself into a refrigerator, one no animal could open. The logic was simple but brilliant. Cold stops decay. Ice hides scent. Snow muffles everything. The same storm that could kill them also kept their food alive. They didn't fight the freeze, they used it. Even today, along Hudson Bay, archaeologists find frozen caches, fish still whole, buried centuries ago by hands that understood patience. The cold had held them perfectly, as if time itself had forgotten to move. Imagine that, a meal waiting beneath the snow for someone who might never return. It wasn't luck. It was trust between the people and the season. They didn't fear the storm. They partnered with it. They taught it how to feed them. They turned the enemy into a guardian, the storm into a vault. And in that frozen silence, they wrote the oldest rule of survival: don't fight the cold. Think with it. There came a time when even fire gave up. No wood, no flame, only frost and patience. But the Mandan and Pawnee still cooked with time. Out on the Missouri plains, they buried green corn in clay jars. Deep underground, far from light or sound. No heat, no smoke. Only earth moisture and the slow rhythm of days. What began as grain became something else. Warm, sour, alive. They called it aged corn food that made itself. The soil kept its secret. Inside the jars, life changed shape. Fermentation worked where fire could not. It softened kernels, built lactic acid, and turned perishable into permanent. Each jar was a quiet kitchen one that never needed tending. The smell was strange, sharp, tangy. To some, it might have smelled like rot, but to those who knew, it was the scent of survival. That sour bite meant winter could pass without hunger. And in the silence of the frozen plains, a family could eat warmth born from patience, not flame. Archaeologists still find them clay jars sealed with soil, filled with dark maize fermented 600 years ago. Their walls stained with the fingerprints of women who buried them. Proof that the earth itself had once been their stove. The storm could take their wood, it could take their fire, but it couldn't take what waited below. Because they had learned this simple truth: time cooks too if you let it. Fire fades, but patience ferments. And for those who listened to the land, that was enough. In the old winters, sugar was a dream. No honey, no syrup, no sweetness at all. Just meat smoke and silence. But the Sioux knew even a storm needs sweetness. They gathered chokecherries, blueberries, and cranberries in summer. Tiny bursts of color before the land turned white. They dried them slow over low smoke, then crushed the fruit with stones until it bled purple into the snow. The berries were mixed with fat and thin strips of meat, pounded and folded until they became one. It didn't look like candy, it looked like survival. The fat sealed the air out. The sugar kept death away. Each handful was pure endurance, sweet, heavy, alive with memory. When the world froze, this little red brick of life was what kept the people moving. The taste was strange, half sweet, half wild. It stuck to the teeth, to the ribs, to the will. And in a land where the sun vanished for weeks, that sweetness meant something more. It was morale. It was warmth. It reminded them what spring felt like. Leather bags filled with pemmican traveled for hundreds of miles. Archaeologists still find them buried or left behind by explorers who traded with the Sioux. The fat still clings to the hide. The berries still stain the grain. Proof that even the simplest mixture can outlive the hand that made it. Out there, in the silence of frost, a bite of pemmican was more than food. It was light. It was memory. Because in a world of ice and hunger, sweetness was hope. When the trees were gone and even smoke felt rare, the Plains tribes found warmth in a different place inside themselves. No wood, no coals, just will and fat. They rendered buffalo tallow in stone pots and shallow pits. Slow heat turned muscle into gold liquid fire that hardened like wax when it cooled. The smell clung to the air for days, sweet, heavy, alive. When it solidified, they poured it into rawhide bags stored tight and clean, safe from wind and rot. One spoonful could feed a hunter through a day of frost. A handful could keep a child warm through the night. Fat burned slow inside the body, a quiet ember under the skin, a warmth that traveled with them across the plains. They didn't call it energy, they just called it life. When the storms came and firewood vanished, they dipped dried meat into melted tallow, sealing it from decay. They rubbed it into skin to block wind and snow. It was food. It was heat. It was armor. Every use whispered the same truth the buffalo never stopped giving. At Wind River, archaeologists still find the proof grease-stained pits, ash lines, bone shards marking the places where families once rendered fat each year. The ground still smells faintly of smoke when warmed by sun. The memory of fire stored in earth. They didn't just eat fat. They carried it in packs, in skin, in blood. They carried the storm's answer within. Because real warmth doesn't come from flame. It comes from what survives after it. They didn't feed their bodies. They fed the fire in their veins. Long before freezers, before cans, before comfort food, was survival written in patience. They didn't hoard it. They honored it. Each method was a conversation between hunger and wisdom, between what the land gave and what the hands remembered to do. They dried, smoked, buried, and waited not out of fear, but out of respect for the storm that would come. When winter erased the world, they ate what time had taught them. Every bite was a story, every flavor a decision made months before. Out there, memory wasn't just thought it was food. They carried it in bags, in jars, in the body itself. A promise sealed by fire, sun, and snow. And when the fire finally burned low and the last embers turned to ash, warmth didn't vanish. It stayed in patience, in memory, in blood. They survived not because they were stronger, but because they listened. Listened to the land, to the wind, to time. Because when the storm came, only memory fed the living. And memory was something they had prepared. Stay by the fire.